Hi, I'm Leslie Maddox, and today I'm going to show you something that will make it so much easier for you to choose homeschool curriculum for your kids, and that's identifying your kids' learning preferences. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about because I feel it's what gave me a lot of my academic success. I have a degree in computer engineering. I graduated summa cum laude, which is highest honors, and also as a university honors scholar. And I attribute a lot of that academic success to just identifying my learning preferences. The summer before my freshman year of college, I was nervous about starting school. I knew I was going to be entering into a challenging program, and I really wanted to do my best. And in addition to that, I had scholarship money I wanted to keep. I was a National Merit Scholar, and along with that came some scholarship money, and I needed to keep my GPA up for that, to keep that. So I prayed about it a lot that summer before my freshman year and asked God to really help me to do my best with every assignment that I was given. And one of the things I love about God is that when He answers yes to a prayer, He answers it, for me, always in a way that's unpredictable, in a way that I wouldn't have guessed. I thought maybe He would just make me work hard, make me able to work really hard, or to make me smarter than I was. But what He did was show me very specifically the things that helped me in learning and the things that were not as effective or that really distracted me from learning. Identifying those, the things that helped me to learn and the things that distracted me, helped me so much. And in a way that I feel is reproducible for other people. For my kids, I want to help them in the same way. I want to help them to identify their learning preferences, the things that make learning effective for them, that help them to be attentive when they're learning. So that's what I'm going to show you today. I'm going to start off by showing you a printable that I created that you can download from my website. I'll put the link down below. I will explain that printable to you, how I have it set up. I will show you examples of how I use it in my homeschool and then give you my best tips for identifying your kids' learning preferences so that you can then go on to have a better chance of choosing curriculum that will really work for them. So let's get started. When you go to my website and download the printable, you will see that it comes in black, pink, and then also blue. I'll first show you the black one. They all have the same content on them. But since I haven't written this one up, I'll go ahead and explain it to you. There are two sections to this printable. There's the learning methods section and then more the interpersonal section. The learning methods are different ways that curriculum companies and teachers use to impart information to children or to any student of any age. Different ways that we can learn things. We're not trying to pigeonhole our kids into any of these learning methods. We're just documenting what works and what doesn't, because one learning method may work for one subject and a different learning method in another subject. We're not trying to pigeonhole them. We're not trying to put our kids in a box. We're just documenting what works for them and what doesn't. So very quickly, the different learning methods I have are for written word, and I have that separated out into reading and writing, because just because someone loves to read doesn't mean that they're going to learn well through writing, especially very young children. Spoken word, that's listening to, let's say, lectures, speeches, audiobooks, read-alouds, and then there's the actual, where the student is the one actually speaking, processing information in a verbal way. Then there's visual, and so what I have for that are pictures, graphic organizers, maps, charts. Then there's interactive, and that's where the student is interacting with the learning. It could be in a physical way, like building something or crafting or using a lap book, or it could be just like working with data, like drawing or an activity book. Lift the flap books. A student that may not love to read might really love a lift the flap book. I've seen a lot of success with those in my homeschool. And there's lift the flap books even for older kids, not just for the little ones. And then there's physical, where we're learning things in a physical way. I've heard of some students learning, let's say, their multiplication facts really well by jumping on a trampoline, or a student who may not love to sit and read might read very well walking on a treadmill. But It's not about interacting with the information, it's about the physicality of it. So it could be active play, physical games like throwing a ball back and forth or jumping on a trampoline. It could simply be just standing. Maybe sitting results in a lot of fidgeting from a student, but standing up helps to get some of those fidgets out and helps them to focus on what they're learning. Some sense of touch, just even holding something. I've noticed with my oldest that while he can read fine on an e-reader, a Kindle, I feel like he prefers a physical book because he has to actually flip the pages. There's something about that that really helps him to focus on what he's reading, and that makes him attentive to a book, especially when he was a very reluctant reader. And then there's also sounds. Maybe some students might be very distracted by music while they're learning, or may really enjoy music, and it helps set a really helpful environment for them in learning. So those are some different learning methods that are used, and we're going to use this. I'll show you some examples in a minute of how you might go about using these. At the bottom of this printable, you'll find the interpersonal section: independent, one-on-one, and group. And some students may prefer one kind of learning environment over another. All right, so now let's see how we use this. My number one tip for you in learning how to use this printable is to first have mommy fill one out for herself. And the reason for this is to identify any bias that the mother, the homeschool parent, the teacher may have when it comes to learning methods. You'll notice that I did type these in. The PDF that you get when you download the printable will also be editable, so you'll be able to type in here, or you could just print it out as it is and write it in, or doodle, or take a picture and glue it there. Whatever you have to do to make this worksheet work for you. So anyway, I typed things in so that you wouldn't have to decipher my messy writing. After I typed it in, I printed it out and I marked it up some just to make it easy for me to reference. And I marked that, I put a little star next to the written word because I know that the written word is my preferred learning method. Down here under the interpersonal section, I put a little star next to independent because I prefer to learn independently. If I really need to, I will go ask questions one-on-one, so I rated them. This is my preferred method. One-on-one is number 2, and then group settings do not work for me. So when I look at this, I can see that I'm probably going to have a bias for the written word, and I did have a bias for the written word. I expected that my kids would also learn very well from reading a book, and that's an understandable assumption, not just because I prefer that, but because these first two are very traditional learning methods, and these are probably the learning methods that we see the most. I suspect that there's a disproportionate number of homeschool moms that also have a preference for the written word, and I say that because of how many homeschool moms I hear say that they have a goal that their kids learn to love reading. And while being competent when it comes to reading, I feel is a very reasonable goal for our kids. I certainly have that goal for my kids, and just in the world that we live in and the culture that we live in, being effective communicators is very important. Whether or not they enjoy the process of getting to competence, it's still very important. But when I looked at all of these different learning methods, I realized that maybe expecting my kids to love this one learning method the way that I do is unreasonable for me. There are many other learning methods. I don't believe that any one is better than another. Some of them might be easier to come across and to implement than others, but that doesn't make them necessarily better. Another bias I might have is against spoken word and physical learning, because those are two that I went ahead and crossed out, that they don't work for me. I might ignore those methods of learning in my homeschool. And so I need to be aware of that, so that if I have a student that I determine learns very well in those ways, that I accommodate them. So that's why I would recommend filling one of these out for yourself first, so that you can be aware of any bias that you have. All right, now let's look at the way I filled this out for my boys. I'll try to make this quick and just point out the big things. For my oldest, you see I have a lot of information filled out for him, and you might think, oh, I don't know if I know that much about my kid, but just be aware that My oldest is finishing up 4th grade. I've been homeschooling him since he was in 1st grade, so I have 4 years of knowledge about him, of working with him. So I had a lot of observations to document. That's why I have so much information down for him. All right, so for my oldest, you can see that I crossed out spoken word, but I still filled out the evidence that I have against that being an effective learning method for him. I starred interactive because I have noticed that that is the way that he learns the best, through games, through activity books, through lift the flap books. But even though he's an interactive learner, and art, I think, is a very effective way for some people to learn something about, let's say, science or history, and I tried those in my homeschool through like drawing the Colosseum or drawing something that we saw under a microscope. I found that for him it really doesn't work. He does not enjoy it, and he kind of tunes out. He goes through the motions, but the learning isn't really happening. So I went ahead and crossed that out. And then when it comes to physical, even though he's very athletic, and this here speaks to assumptions. You know, my son, my oldest, is very athletic. He's a natural athlete. He's good at sports. And so you would think that, well, that might be physical games and all would be a way to, for him to learn very well. And it turns out that's not the case. He's very distracted, maybe because he loves the physical aspect of movement so much that his brain isn't thinking about, you know, for example, math facts while he's jumping on a trampoline. You know, he's focused on the jumping, not on skip counting. You know, I realized in that case, I need to not make assumptions about my kids based on the things that they like doing. Just because someone likes doing something doesn't mean that that's going to be a good way for them to learn. So let's see what else I can point out here. Okay, if you look here at the interpersonal section, I have rated that one as well. So here's another way that I made an assumption that turned out to be inaccurate. My oldest is very introverted like me, so I expected that he would love to learn independently, that maybe when he's older, you know, he would like to have a desk in his room and work in there by himself. Turns out that's not the case. Even though he's very introverted, he prefers one-on-one learning. Group learning does not work for him, so much so that I actually crossed that out and I put why. I saw that he is distracted in a group and he kind of fades into the background and completely tunes out when it comes to group learning. So you can see here a couple of places where my assumptions about him based on the things that he enjoyed or based on his personality type affected what I thought would be effective learning methods for him, and I was wrong. And you can see here also, since spoken word is like the worst way for him to learn something, that really was going to narrow down the type of curriculum I chose for him. So when we first started homeschooling, I considered using a curriculum company that does literature-based learning. And since he was in 1st grade and was not reading fluently by himself yet, that was going to require a lot of read alouds from me. And to me, that would have been kind of magical and, you know, wonderful as to be able to sit there and share these books with him. You know, I thought that would be like a really nice magical thing. But even then I realized that he did not like listening to read alouds. And now that I know what I know, which is that is the worst way for him to learn something, I am so thankful that I did not choose that type of literature-based curriculum for him when I would have needed to read everything aloud to him, because that would have been a miserable year. That would have been really hard. He wouldn't have learned anything, and he wouldn't have even wanted to sit there and listen to me read. It would have been a real struggle. It would have affected our relationship negatively, and I would have had a lot of self-doubt of, you know, my choice to homeschool, and even my, you know, the way I was teaching. It would have caused a lot of problems. So this is really helpful to identify what actually works for our kids and not to make assumptions. So this really helps. If we look at my second son, he's my 1st grader, finishing up 1st grade. You may notice here that I actually wrote struggles with perfectionism up at the top. That's because that's not, you know, since this is not comprehensive, it's not an exhaustive set of different learning preferences. These are just, I think, the ones that help the most in choosing curriculum. I didn't really have a place to put that. Struggles with perfectionism. Preference, I have identified as spoken word right now. He loves conversation. He loves to talk. He remembers things that he hears very well. It's very easy for him to memorize poetry. I documented a lot of that. He loves books. So that could probably be also starred as a very effective learning method for him. But since he's just now reading fluently, I didn't mark that down when I first did this because he wasn't there yet. And see, as our kids get older and as they're capable of more, we may notice some things about them. A learning method may rise in priority or in effectiveness for them as they learn new things. What else? For his interpersonal, you can see that I put that independent work was his preferred way of working. Number 2 is one-on-one work, and number 3 is in a group. Now, this is a really good place to show how assumptions can kind of get in the way. While my oldest son is quite introverted, my middle son, both of my younger boys, are very extroverted. So you might assume, I know I did, that group work would be the best way for him to learn as opposed to independent and one-on-one work. And I was wrong. Look, it is number 3. I found that in a group, since he struggles with perfectionism and also he's very competitive, the group environment brought out his competitive nature and got in the way of his learning. So I found that it's not an effective way for him to learn, because then he would just kind of, if he felt in comparing himself to his brothers that he was not doing as well as one of them or wasn't learning something as well as one of them, and not that I was trying to foster that environment, but he still in his head, he kind of had that going on in his head that he was comparing himself to his brothers. And if he felt he wasn't measuring up for some reason, then he shut down. And so I put that as like the worst way for him to learn. Hates getting instruction. He wants to learn on his own. So even though he's very extroverted, he prefers to work independently. And so going forward, I'm learning to try to structure certain subjects or choose curriculum that allows him to work independently as much as possible, because that's what he prefers. Now let me point something else out here. You noticed that for my oldest and for my middle son, group learning was number 3. Well, guess what I've been doing, how I've been teaching science and history in a group setting. And while sometimes that was fun and it was okay while they were younger, I can see that going forward, I'm going to have to put a stop to that. I'm not going to try to save time during my day by working as a group, because I'm not really saving any time. There are struggles because that group learning is not going to work for us. That also means that certain, might call them fads in the homeschool world, like morning baskets and poetry tea time, that kind of thing, while that is talked about a lot in some homeschool circles, that kind of thing is not going to work in my homeschool, so I just ignore them. And that's why something like this really can help you out. It can help you to focus on the things that are actually going to help you in your homeschool, and ignore the things that really work great for other people and sound awesome and you would implement if you could, but maybe aren't going to work in your homeschool. For my youngest, this is my just turned 5-year-old. He's a preschooler right now. He'll be starting kindergarten next year. You can see I have much less filled out for him than I did for my older students, because I'm still learning about him, and there's only so much that I know so far, even though I worked with him a lot. Also, I don't know if this is just how he is, or if this is just because of his age. It seems like right now all of these learning methods work for him. I have noticed that he really loves to work in workbooks and activity books, so I started interactive. He also loves to study picture books and talks about them, so I've started that. I could probably also start spoken word, because I've noticed that he loves read alouds and he memorizes a lot of what he's heard. And then when it comes to interpersonal, even though he's a preschooler, I can see that he really likes to work independently. He loves to disappear by himself into the schoolroom and come up with creations that I don't send him to do. He just does it on his own. He loves to work in workbooks by himself. He will ask me for instructions. What am I supposed to do here, Mommy? And then he's just happy to work by himself. He'll do puzzles by himself. He even though he's also very extroverted, like my middle son, he also seems to prefer independent work. But we'll see. You know, he's going into kindergarten next year. He's going to learn more, and so more information will come to light as the years go on. Now that I've shown you how I use these worksheets, let me give you a few tips about using them. My first tip is to take your time filling these worksheets out. You might have a little bit of trouble at first, especially if you have not yet begun to homeschool your kids. So take your time with it. Have them somewhere where you can go and write things down as you make an observation, and just think about daily activities. Think about an area where your student learned something really well, and how did they learn that? Think about an area where your student struggled and ask yourself, I wonder what it was that caused them to struggle. See if you can find any commonalities in areas that they struggled, or in areas that they struggled in learning something specifically. So just kind of take your time with it. My second tip for you is to revisit this at least twice a year. Revisit the worksheets once you fill them out. Twice a year, put them in your planner, put a reminder on your phone, whatever you got to do to remind you. I would recommend revisiting them somewhere in the middle of the school year after you've had some time with curriculum, so that you can think about how your curriculum has been working for you and for your students. Go ahead and document what has been working and what hasn't for each of your kids. And because at that point you may want to make some changes in the way you use your curriculum based on what you know about their learning preferences. The second time I recommend revisiting this is toward the end of the school year, as you're wrapping things up, before you take a long break, so that you don't forget how things have been going. At that point, you'll have gone through the rest of your school year, and you'll know even more about how well things work for you and how well certain things didn't work. My third tip is that if there's an area where your student is especially struggling, look at the worksheet, see what learning methods you've identified as being especially helpful to them, and use those learning methods for those areas of struggle to support them in those areas. You might see a real big difference in that area of struggle. I have a lot more tips for you about how to get started homeschooling. I'm putting all the videos with those tips in this playlist I have here at the side, so check that out to learn more about how to get started homeschooling. Bye-bye.